This is the second in a series of youth homelessness webinars that we'll be doing as part of our ongoing Practice Knowledge project, and we'll continue to keep you all posted on those in our newsletters and on social media. I'm Mindy Mitchell. I'm a Program and Policy Analyst here at the National Alliance to End Homelessness, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Most importantly, though, we'll be hearing from two great providers who are doing a couple of different host homes models. Rocky Samoyas, who is the Program Manager for the GLBT Host Home Program at Avenues for Homeless Youth in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Betsy Vidlak, who is the Director of Youth Programs at Community Action Partnership of Western Nebraska. During the presentations today, you can enter questions into the question box on the right of your screen, and we'll answer those questions after both panelists have completed their presentations. This webinar will also be recorded and made available on the Alliance's website. So again, thank you all for being here today to learn more about using the host homes model for housing young people who are experiencing homelessness. Host homes are a very flexible and cost-effective model for housing homeless youth, and they involve utilizing existing housing in the community sponsored by caring adults called hosts, who provide shelter to young people while the youth providers handle the case management services and the host training and support. As with any intervention, of course, there can be some difficulties in implementing the model, particularly around licensing where minor youth are concerned. But because of its flexibility and relatively lower cost, we think there is a lot of potential for scaling up this particular response. To begin to do that, of course, we'll need to learn more about how the model works in practice, and we're going to start that by looking today at these two particular models. And we'll begin with Rocky from Avenues in Minneapolis. Go ahead, Rocky.
All right. Hey, everybody. Well, first I should say that this is my first PowerPoint, so bear with me with any technological problems. And I believe that Mindy and Betsy are also technologically challenged. So but we're going to make this happen.
Thanks for sharing that, Rocky.
I outed you, Mindy, as technologically challenged, though I think you're lying about that. But anyway, I am the program manager of the GLBT Host Own program, which is one of 5 programs that Avenues for Homeless Youth runs here in Minnesota. And I'm going to run through the first 5 slides pretty quickly, and Mindy, you can go to the next one. Just has some information about Minnesota specifically. We do have, on any given night, about 4,000 young people who are experiencing homelessness, and we're lucky to have good data here because of Wilder Research. They do a count every 3 years. And for those of you who are lovers of numbers and statistics, I just encourage you to check them out. The Wilder Research site, actually, I think there's a link on the slide that you can access. So I'm not going to spend too much time on our numbers. I think the reasons why young people are, which is the next slide, Mindy, the reasons why young people are experiencing homelessness here are probably similar to the causes and underlying factors that you all know about. So I mentioned some of them, and I try to always balance the information that is readily available around families and family rejection and family conflict with information also about kind of the bigger social and systemic barriers that have to do with racial and economic justice that impact specifically poor communities and communities of color disproportionately here, and those communities experience homelessness differently. So I always want to make sure that we're balancing not just focusing on family and family rejection, but also the systemic barriers, and we can talk more about that later. Let's see, next slide. Just lists the 5 programs that we run here at Avenues. So we have 2 buildings that have beds for young people who are experiencing homelessness, and our age range is 16 to 20. We have one building here in North Minneapolis that has 21 beds and one building in Brooklyn Park, and that's a brand spanking new building, which is really lovely because we were able to design it in a way that made sense to us. So all of the rooms are gender neutral, and our individual rooms, all of the bathrooms are gender neutral, which is really quite nice. Young people have fobs to their rooms, which I think is really amazing theoretically, but that has meant that I think we've probably had 12 to 20 fobs lost at this point since we opened in February. And then we have the 3 host home programs, and I'm going to talk mostly about the GLBT host home program. However, we also have the suburban host home program and the Minneapolis host home program, which my lovely coworker Ryan, he runs those 2 host home programs. And if any of you are interested in getting more information about that, I can certainly connect you to Ryan, because our 3 host home programs share some values and operational procedures and systems, but we also have some differences. So the next slide talks about those 3 host home programs a little bit, and again, we can focus more on those during the Q&A. But the GLBT one, or the Giblet host home program as we call it here at Avenues, that's the oldest one, and it has been a program of 2 different nonprofits here in Minnesota. It was first started by an organization called YouthLink back in '97, and I was actually the person hired to set it up at the end of '97. So I've been with the program for a long time, but it has been housed in 2 different nonprofits, and it has been here at Avenues since 2007. And then the suburban host home program was started in 2011, and our youngest one is the Minneapolis host home program, which was launched in 2012. And we can talk more a little during the Q&A about the kind of the lessons learned and what we've done well and what we haven't done well. So why host homes? Well, Mindy did a good job in the very beginning talking about why it's a kind of an attractive and effective response to youth homelessness, especially for young people that have experienced being in out-of-home placements like foster care. Here in the Twin Cities, the majority of young people who are experiencing homelessness have come out of foster care. So one of the reasons that we decided to start a host home program back in '97 was because we knew that system had failed many young people, and we didn't want to recreate a broken wheel, so we wanted something that was smaller, non-institutional, and rooted in community. And well, it's cost effective, so there you have it. And again, we can talk more about that later. And you know, one of the things that I try to make clear when I'm out in the community in recruiting folks who want to be hosts is that the goal of the program is really to provide safe shelter and food to young people so they can work on their goals without having to worry about shelter and food. It's not, the goal is not to create family, but you know, those are the intangibles, the icing on the cake, as I like to call it. And we definitely see that happening with our host homes here, that we see lifelong relationships being established, that this is something that impacts young people and hosts deeply. And, you know, by extension, it impacts our community and kind of the larger system. So next slide talks a little bit about our basic operation, and all 3 host home programs here share these basic operations. I'm going to get into the GLBT host home program specifically soon. And I'm not going to read, I guess from the slide you can take a look, but the recruiting, the screening, the training, the support of hosts, which comes from, so I support the hosts in the GLBT host home program. Ryan is the support person for the Minneapolis and suburban host home programs, and then case managers are the ones who support the young people. And youth are referred by partners. When the GLBT host home program first started in '97, it was also the structure that we started the program with is the same structure that the Minneapolis and suburban host home program have now, which is the referring parties continue to provide case management when the young person is in a host home. However, in the last 3 years with the GLBT Host Home program, we've had our own case manager, our in-house case manager, and I'll get into that a little bit more later. Okay, next slide. Key features. Each host home program has an advisory council or an action council. So I've had a group of volunteers from the community who help me do all aspects of the recruiting and the screening and the training. Essentially, it's just having more voices out in the community and also voices that have connections to different parts of the community. And because I am a social worker and I'm running a program out of a social services organization, I really wanted my advisory council to be made up of people who are more community organizers and activists, to try to bridge social services with social justice. So that's pretty deeply rooted in our philosophy, and also impacts how we do the recruitment. I did send a document that outlines the values and understandings of our host home programs. So if any of you are interested in reading that or taking a look, I think Mindy has made that available somewhere out there on the line.
Yeah, that will be on the website when we post the webinar.
Okay, all right. And I added a little question at the bottom there that we can talk about later. The fact that this is a volunteer-based program makes it cost-effective, but it also raises the question of who has the ability and the resources to volunteer to host. And here in Minnesota, we are unfortunately probably the #1 state when it comes to racial disparities around education and employment. So when we talk about who has the ability and resources, we're talking mostly white middle-class folks. And most of the young people in the GLBT Host Home program are youth of color. Next slide talks a little bit about the recruitment and screening process and the training, the 16 hours of training that the hosts have to go through. The 3 programs have combined the training, which is nice. So Ryan and I share the 16 hours in all 3 programs. So hosts from all 3 programs get to spend the weekend together and learn together, which has been pretty great. There are some pros and cons to that. Let's see. I don't know if you can see the very last part of the training. We end the training with panels of, on Saturday, a panel of the past hosts and present hosts, and then on Sunday, a panel of youth, and that's a very helpful part of the training. Next slide. Now we get specifically to the GLBT Host Home program. Let me do a time check. I'm almost done here. I want to make sure that we have, Betsy gets lots of time, and then we have Q&A. So the gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender host home program, like I said, has been around since '97. And when we first started, we had case managers from the community referring young people, and then those youth workers, case managers, would continue to provide support to the young people while in host homes. That worked out well for many years. However, one of the things that didn't work so well is, let's say a case manager from one organization referred a youth into host home, and then that staff, that case manager left, and the organization didn't hire somebody to replace that position. So then we had a young person in host home without case management. And that was one of the disadvantages. And then also case management was inconsistent. So, you know, let's say I'm working with 10 different youth workers, and case management is done differently in 10 different organizations. So those were, you know, again, we made it work. We were creative about making that work, but it brought in some messiness, which, you know, we embrace messiness, and I'm sure we'll talk about that as well. We don't use the language of placement. We try to be very non-institutional about that. Young people actually read the files of the hosts and get to know the hosts fairly well before they, well, at least through the information that's in their files. And then they tell me who they would like to meet, and I set up that first meet and greet. But the hosts know very little about the youth. So right now we have our own case manager, and if a youth is referred, that case manager will get connected with the young person and go from there. Youth-driven matching process, consistent support. We have the next slide talks a little bit about the ongoing support. A lot of just being available over the phone, having meetings. There's a monthly support group for all 3 programs the first Saturday of the month that Ryan and I alternate facilitating. The monthly home visit that the case manager and I do together. And then we plan some fun stuff. The last social event we did, we rented a whole roller garden and had a really gay roller skating party, which was awesome. Lots of great outfits. And then youth received intensive case management from our in-house case manager, who really is never in the office. She's just out in the community, and she meets young people where they're at, both emotionally and physically. And by that I mean, you know, she might have a meeting at 10 p.m. at a coffee shop. Lessons learned, the next slide. This is the stuff that I don't think any of you will be surprised by, that this, because this is community-based, it's a messy and magical thing that we're doing here. And probably the hardest part from, as far as my job working with hosts, is managing expectations and helping hosts set clear boundaries, and really talking about power and privilege and assumptions, especially with white middle-class hosts. And I think I will, let's go to the next slide. We can save this conversation for the Q&A, talking about assumptions of that people have, especially people who come into the program wanting to host. What kind of young person are they expecting? And this really impacts recruitment. So I want to just table that until we are all able to have more of a discussion about this. The next slide is more lessons learned. Our Minneapolis Host Own program was not one that was created and owned by the community, and we've had quite a bit of trouble recruiting hosts and getting that program up and running. And our Host Own programs are also small. The GLBT one does not receive any government funding. And I'm going to end with the question about commitment to social justice. We are really invested and I guess committed to looking at what is our role as a nonprofit and also as a community-based organization running a volunteer program as a response to youth homelessness. What is our role in looking at the racial disparities, economic disparities in this country, and certainly here in Minnesota, which really gets to looking at, again, white privilege and other issues of power. And nonprofits are not always the best at looking at power. So we do this with a lot of humility, and we're not afraid to share our mistakes and ask for help and be held accountable by the community. And then I ended with one of my favorite local artists, one of his posters. So it gets to the philosophy that we hold pretty dear here, that this is about solidarity and not charity. And on that note, I'll end.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rocky. You guys really have such an amazing program there, and I can never hear enough about it. Next, we'll hear about a different model for host homes that'll particularly focus on how the model can be implemented, and works really well for rural communities. So next up, we'll have Betsy Didlack. Betsy, please tell us about your work in western Nebraska.
Great. Thank you, Mindy. So I'm going to talk to you all a little bit about our rural host home programs for youth experiencing homelessness in western Nebraska. Go to the next slide, Mindy. So when I'm talking about western Nebraska, I have a little example of a map here. I'm talking about the Panhandle of Nebraska. It's that little corner area. That area covers 14,000 square miles. And there's a lot of different counties. There's 11 counties, a lot of different dynamics that go on. The northern counties border the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and then the southern counties border Colorado and Wyoming. So in the center of the Panhandle is where our youth shelter is, which is how we kind of came up with the host home program, so that's important to note. It would sometimes take 2.5 hours one way to get youth to the youth shelter in the center of the Panhandle. So our community in our Panhandle area has some really high poverty rates, very poor child well-being indicators, high juvenile arrest rates. Similar to like Rocky mentioned, we have a very high disproportionate minority contact rate. Minorities are contacted at a higher rate with law enforcement than other young individuals. So a lot of systemic barriers as well for youth experiencing homelessness. Do you want to go to the next slide, Mindy? So the programs that we have here at Kaplan include the Panhandle Support Systems for Youth, and that is the rural host home component I'm going to talk about today. So I'll go on with that here in a minute. We have a basic center program, youth shelter, and that's in the central area of the Panhandle in Scottsbluff. We have some HUD-funded supportive housing for older youth, and that's for youth ages 18 through 24. They're both transitional and permanent housing for homeless youth. Most of those youth have to have a disability. We use a housing first model, and a lot of those youth, similar to, as Rocky said, are coming from the foster care system and are now experiencing homelessness. And then finally, we also have some teen outreach programs, which are geared toward pregnancy prevention, reducing school dropout behavior, and we work with some younger youth in those areas. So the next slide is going to tell you a little bit about how we came to be with having rural host homes. So the first initiative we were involved in was the FISB-funded rural host home demonstration. I think that happened around 2008, if I remember correctly, and that was an emergency-based host home program for youth ages 12 to 18 that could go up to 21 days. So our purpose in looking at host homes at that time was to really be able to get youth access to emergency shelter in their own community where they felt safe and did not have to be taken out of their school system or out of their support systems because of the distance to the larger community of Scottsbluff. So we set those up in some of the neighboring rural communities. We have Shadron, Sydney, and Alliance were some of the targeted communities. That grant, we learned a lot of lessons there. And some of it kind of transitioned into our supportive systems for rural homeless youth demonstration that began, I think, in 2009. In that program, we were able to develop some transitional host homes where youth were able to stay up to 21 months, very similar to a transitional living program. And we've been doing that since that work began. So what we've kind of done from going forward is merging both the emergency host home opportunities and the transitional host home opportunities because we see the need for both of those to be accessible to youth. So the transitional and emergency host homes in the new work are for 18 through 24-year-olds. You want to go to the next slide, Mindy? So the Panhandle Support System host home program is really what we're looking at now, and that's a really youth-driven system. We also have some program-initiated host homes as well. But what we found, and one of the lessons learned that we found, was that a lot of youth have already identified community members or you know, distant family members that they can stay with and that they feel safe with. And sometimes those family members just need a little bit of support in order to keep that youth housed. So what we found was most effective was to use that really youth-driven host home recruitment process. That being said, we also have youth who relocate to our Panhandle or come in from somewhere else and have very little or no support systems, not friends or anyone. And in that manner, we also have some program-initiated host homes that we've recruited that can work with those young people. So we provide a stipend to the host home families, and we pay them what is considered here in Scottsbluff, the Panhandle area, a fair market rent value, which is around $400 a month, and that is to cover the youth staying in their home. What we expect for them in the home is that the youth are not asked to pay any rent or provide other things to the family, and that they're covered under the stipend that we provide. The family also provides the food for them. They have to have a safe space, their own bedroom or room that is theirs, access to only, access to a bathroom, that sort of thing, because we really feel that's important. And then if the youth or family is still in need of a little help, we can help with a little bit of transportation or food. It just depends on kind of what that family situation is. We also have case management that goes in and works with the youth in the home, similar to like what Rocky said. We have case managers here within the agency that can work with them, or we also have other agencies in the community that provide the case management services. Because most of these youth are aging out of foster care who have been in the system, many of them qualify for a service here that we call PALS, which is a Chafee-funded case management program in Nebraska, where youth can access independent living, skill building with case managers and support in that manner. So training for host homes is kind of similar to what Rocky said as well. We do a lot of kind of phone calls and individualized support that they may need. Because we're covering such a large, vast area, we don't have necessarily large trainings where everyone can come together, but we do have the wonderful opportunity of having what's called the Panhandle Partnership Training Academy. This is a collaboration with our local community college, and through that partnership with them, we're able to provide training. Anyone in the Panhandle really can provide training through the Training Academy at a very low cost to participants, and it also allows participants to gain some credits or some possible credit building toward a skill award or an Associate of Arts degree. Many people in the Panhandle, we have a very low rate of graduate degrees or undergraduate degrees, so it's a great opportunity to really build that system of care as well. For us, licensing is not required in Nebraska right now. I don't know how long that will go on. You never know when that's going to change. But currently, because there's a law in Nebraska around the number of unrelated people that can live together, because we're not supporting more than one youth in a home at a time, typically, we're not falling under the requirement to license. If we were placing several youth in a home at once, that might be another issue, but that has not been an issue for us so far. Do you want to go to the next slide, Mindy? Thank you. So finally, the last thing I kind of wanted to talk about is how did we get the funding for this, and what does this look like, big picture. So similar like what Rocky said about an advisory council, we have a system of care for older youth, which is a collaborative group of agencies, youth, professionals and other youth working organizations that come together once a month, and we really use a collective impact approach to move the work forward. So we bring together all of our funding that we can and really braid that to do the work. So some of the dollars used in the training and with this project are from other agencies. A lot of them are private funding dollars. There's a little teeny bit of state dollars involved, so we really try to bring those dollars together to make the most impact for everybody's dollars. The collaborative partners that are involved include nonprofit agencies like ours, the region or the behavioral health authorities, as we call them. We have probation partners as well as State Department of Health and Human Services child protection workers involved, and we have youth involved. So many of the youth are youth who have kind of come through the system or aged out. They're now training to work in our programs, or they're kind of peer outreach workers. So there's several youth that are involved in that as well. And one of the things that we all work on together is a really solid mutual training plan for all of us, because we really believe that both the youth specialists and case managers, as well as the host homes, and even the training provided in the community is that we're treating youth in the best way possible that we can. A lot of the things like Rocky talked about, with privilege and that sort of thing, are very important, that we ensure that the community is as safe as we can for these young people. And then finally, we really look at the systemic barriers as well, and use a statewide system approach to really trying to solve the issues of youth homelessness and creating safe places for them. There's several projects across the state working on these initiatives, and so we try to come together to really address this, as well as policy issues in the state that can make it hard for youth experiencing homelessness to access services. So I think I'll leave kind of the rest of the stuff for our Q&A and see if I can help in any way there. So I just kind of left my contact information here if anyone has any specific questions. When we started some of the programs, I really reached out to a lot of other host home programs across the nation and borrowed their handbooks and some of their forms, and utilized those to really help shape what we were doing, because it's really hard to start something like that if you don't have something to kind of look off of and get started with. So, okay, Mindy, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Betsy. You guys have such a great program too, and as I've talked to you about before, I just think it's so important that we all think about how the experience of and the approach to homelessness is so different for many rural communities. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started with the question and answer portion of the webinar. And for all of you listening in, you can enter questions in the question box on the right of the screen at any time. And one of the first questions that we had, you guys, was I think a really good one. As we know, there's a big intersection with youth experiencing homelessness and youth who have been involved with the child welfare system. So one of our listeners wanted to find out, how is it that you make a host home different from just another placement experience? And Rocky, do you want to start? We'll just go back and forth, Rocky and Betsy.
Sure. Well, when young people call us who are interested in being in the host home program, or are referred and then start working with our case manager, we talk about the fact that this is not a licensed program. So these are volunteers from the community who are choosing to share their homes with them, and that they will get to read the files of the hosts and tell us if they want to meet with them or not. So, in as much as you can say that it's a choice to be in this program, I don't think young people are choosing to be homeless. Therefore, I use the word choice very carefully here, right? Young people are coming to us because they want to be a part of this program, but I realize that that desire is really rooted in a need, because nobody probably would choose to be in a housing program if they didn't have to. So we talk a lot about also the power differences, and we're really upfront about what's hard about the host home program for both hosts and youth. And I think maybe that transparency makes it a little bit different than being in a out-of-home placement in the child welfare system, because I think there are more limitations within those systems about being transparent about the messiness of it all, right? We have limitations there and what we can and can't talk about. So it's small, it's rooted in community. The hosts tend to be part of the community, so there's that that aspect of it, and I'll stop there because I can yak away, and nobody wants that.
I always want that, Rocky. How about you, Betsy? I think one of the main ways that we kind of get around that is that a lot of the host homes that we're seeing are actually chosen by the youth. So they're people that are outside of that system that they've been dealing with, and they're people that they've identified. We go in and do some screening and some training and that sort of thing to try to support that relationship, but we really utilize that youth voice to identify those host homes, and I think that's been very successful in helping them see that it's not really connected to the system in that way.
Can I add one thing? This is Rocky that I forgot to say, is that the hosts don't really have information on the young people, and I think that's a key difference, because typically young people who are part of the child welfare system or social workers have a lot of information on them, and so will the people who are caretaking them, and with the host home program that's not the case.
Okay, great. Let's talk about some of the barriers for implementing host homes. I think in looking at the very scant research on host homes, there was the Rural Host Homes Demo Project, and I think one of the barriers that a lot of people experienced was the licensing barriers, and I think maybe you guys in your particular programs haven't struggled with this, but you can talk about that a little bit. But I think probably another big barrier is just recruiting hosts, right? So if you guys could talk a little bit more about what that process looks like for each of your programs. And Rocky, particularly for Avenues, because you guys do have 3 different kinds of host homes programs, and I know they both kind of have different processes for overcoming that barrier.
Sure, and I think of all the 3 host home programs, the GLBT Host Own program is probably the one that has the easiest time recruiting hosts, and I say that carefully because it's still super hard for the GLBT Host Own program. That is by far the hardest part of our job, is the recruitment piece. But with the GLBT Host Own program, there is I'm part of that community. I've been part of that community here in Minnesota for a long time as a community organizer, as an activist. So there is a connection that makes it easier, right? And with the other programs, especially the Minneapolis Host Home program, Minneapolis is a big city. What is the hook? What is the hook? With the GLBT Host Home program, there's an identity. It's identity-based. So that makes it easier. So the barriers for the other 2, I would say, is figuring out how do we have a connection to a community that's fairly large, and a community that also has lots of sub-communities, and how do we maintain an identity, or how do we create an identity that allows for people to feel connected in a way that's not just about, oh, let's save the homeless children. And I think any program that has the, oh, let's save the homeless children at its heart, isn't going to work very successfully. Boy, I don't even know if I answered your question. Did I answer your question? You talked about barriers, right?
Yeah, especially with recruiting hosts.
Yeah, and the fact that it's volunteer-based, and some of our hosts can afford to do that, and I'm sure there are other folks in the community who would like to be a host, but they can't afford to do so. So those are some of the issues that we're talking about, and we're actually in the middle of trying to figure out how do we create incentives without bringing in the kind of the more negative culture around foster care that many young people have experienced. And just to say, I don't mean to say that foster care is a bad system. It's just that we only work with young people for whom that system has failed. So
right.
Yeah.
Okay. And Betsy, how about for you guys? Particularly in the rural context, I think recruitment has to be more difficult just logistically because, as you mentioned, you're so spread out from all the different places where these young people are coming from.
Sure. Yeah, I think recruitment also would be a challenge for us as well. Different reasons or things that go on in the communities. But one of the things that I think we've done to kind of try to overcome that is really you got to utilize what you do have within your community. So what we do is try to build on those relationships or resources that we already have. So we may not get new funding or new work or new things to come in, but we may have some systems we can tap into. So for us, one way that we've recruited, for example, is going through the school systems and utilizing the school counselors. So we had a young person who was experiencing homelessness in the school system, so the counselor reached out. Well, the counselor had a relationship with another person who was willing to do it. So it's really building on that sort of thing. We go speak to small local groups such as the Kiwanis or the Elks or the, the different groups in the communities that have those people that are wanting to volunteer their time and wanting to help out in ways but don't always know, how to connect to that. And there's usually somebody that will come out of that group that is interested. And even making one new host home is always a great success.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I've had several questions that are kind of more maybe system-y, outcomes kind of questions. So let's delve into that exciting wonky stuff for a little while. Can you guys talk about outcomes for your host homes programs? Do you have some sense, maybe even data from within your programs, because you all do several different models within a program? How do host homes compare to like the brick and mortar programs that you have within your own organizations? Do you have any quantitative data about that, or do you have just like your own sense of whether the outcomes are the same or better?
Betsy, do you want to go first, or do you want me to take a shot at it?
I think, for one, it's so individualized, and I think it's really hard to do, especially in on our scale of host homes. We may only have 2 or 3 young people in a host home at a time. So to give like a large, broad-based, so many youth are successful, I think is really hard to do. I think each individual youth has their own experience and have been successful in their own right. We've had some youth that have stayed the full up to 21 months and have really built good relationships and have been able to move on and go to college and that sort of thing. We have other youth who stayed with a host home for the amount of time that we could financially support and then continued to stay with them on their own, and that family really took them under their wing, and they have a really long-lasting relationship. So I don't know that we have really, large statistics that would support that, but I would say that the youth that we have had experience the host home programs have all been very successful in their own ways.
Mm-hmm. With our GLBT Host Own program, we kind of keep it simple when it comes to numbers and outcomes. We have three main numbers, I guess, that we look at and that we report on. One is that every year we recruit at least 5 new host homes, and we recruit 5 new host homes to maintain a number around 20 to 25 host homes for young people. We need up to 20 to 25 host homes in order to have up to 10 young people in host homes. I hope that makes sense, because about half of the host homes that we have are going to be on hold, meaning a young person just moved out and the hosts are like, call me in 6 months and we'll see where we're at. And they're still part of the program, but they're on hold. So that's what I mean. In order to have up to 10 youth, we need 20 to 25 homes. Every year we lose some, so we try to recruit 5 new ones. And then we also want 75% of the young people who leave host homes to move into stable living. And that's, this year I think we're at 100% because we've had 4 young people leave. So it's not a large number, but those 4 all moved into stable housing. So we tend to always be between 75% and 85%. This year, again, we're at 100, but we still have many months. So that's what we look at when we talk about reporting to funders and to the community. The messy stuff, the magical stuff of host home, that's the stuff that we can't really do with numbers. So that's a lot of talking and writing.
Okay, great. How about, Betsy, you talked about your supportive housing program uses a housing first philosophy. So we've had several questions about what's mandatory in your programs. Is the case management participation mandatory? What can young people get kicked out for? When you're using a host home and you're actually using housing in the community, how easy or difficult is it to kind of employ the housing first harm reduction philosophy in doing that?
Sure, that's a great question. I think that's always something that I think as a provider we're going to struggle with, walking that line of having some level of expectation in order to ensure, you know, the safety and well-being of all those people involved in our program, but also understanding that we're working with youth experiencing trauma and a lot of other issues, and so we want to be sensitive to that and really be able to respond to that in a manner that encourages them to move forward in life. So I think it's a hard line that we walk in all programs. So what we try to do is really strongly encourage the case management. It's not necessarily required. We wouldn't necessarily ask someone to leave a host home if they weren't engaging in case management. But we also don't necessarily tell them that they don't have to. We just really encourage that from them. And for the most part, we've had youth who engage in that. You know, occasionally they may not respond for a month or so, but then they're back on track. And even in the time that if we're not doing the case management with the youth, we're interacting with that host home parent, so we're getting an idea of what's going on in the home. Are there needs that are, you know, not being met? What can we do to support that in that manner? So I don't know. I think we try to do that in a number of ways, but Housing First really says that you don't make sobriety a condition of housing and that sort of thing. And we so far have not had struggles with youth doing, you know, really breaking laws or that sort of thing in the host home. I think the youth have kind of, you know, when they choose to do some of that stuff, they've kind of went elsewhere and done that. But some of that is normal development as well. You know, you're working with teenagers and young adults, and they're going to do funny things, and that's part of brain development. So we really try to work on that training aspect with the host home. And then, like Rocky said as well, the kind of the careful contact piece. I mean, if we had a young person who was really highly assaultive and had some very dangerous behaviors, that may not be a youth who's appropriate for that type of a living situation. You know, maybe they would be better in a different housing program. You know, we try to identify youth that we don't want to set them up for failure. So we try to find youth who we feel would be successful in that sort of manner, and that want that as an option.
Yeah, I think a lot of what Betsy said is similar to us. It's really case by case as far as the involvement that the young person has with Kelly, our case manager. Some young people really want to meet with her at least once a week. Others are engage in case management resentfully. We only see each other once a month when we have the home visits, when Kelly and I go over to the host home. But case management is a part of the program, so young people come in knowing that that's an expectation, that in some ways I'm the case manager for the hosts, and that they have their own case manager that helps them set goals, and that takes the pressure off of the hosts in some ways. I always encourage hosts to not be in the young person's business too much, the goal setting, because who wants to come home and have a host asking them, you know, so did you fill out those 10 job applications? I'd rather that be something that the case manager is working on with the young person. So we try to keep the relationship between the hosts and the youth a much more personal and intimate one, as opposed to hey, I need to know that you're going to school and that you are not late for your work, and you know, more the goal independent living skills stuff we want the case manager to do. So that's how we talk to young people about it and let them know what case management is about. Having said that, some hosts are really in their business and want to, you know, and each host home is so different from another when it comes to the engagement, involvement of hosts and the relationship that they have, that it's hard to have a general description. we have some young people in host homes who may or may not see their hosts very much, and then others who definitely are more, have meals together every night, and it's much more of a family type situation. And one of the things that I didn't say earlier that's important as far as the recruitment piece, sorry Mindy, I'm going backwards here a little bit, is that we are now recruiting many more of our hosts who are coming into our program are folks who are already informally hosting. So it's, and I think through the schools we find out more about these situations, and so the people call me or call Ryan and say, hey, this young person has been living with me, I would love to have the support of your program, and I think it'd be great for the youth to have case management support, and then they become hosts. So we're seeing more and more of that.
Okay, great. And let's see, we have I think time for a couple of more questions, and I want to try to get to the ones that have been, there's one question about the youth and then one that's more kind of the system-y question. So let's do the one that's talking about the youth. This is a specific question about serving youth with criminal justice or JJ involvement and how that works with hosts. I remember when we were first doing some research on the host home stuff, there are some programs that the way that they worked at trying to capitalize on that whole identity community kind of thing. There were some hosts that, you know, maybe the adult had in his or her life previously been involved and wanted to work with JJ youth. So how do you guys kind of navigate that in your programs, if at all? I mean, is it part of the screening process, part of the training process?
It's not part of the screening for our young people. We know, we assume, and we talk a lot during the training of hosts about the kind of racial justice issues and economic justice issues, and especially with GLBT youth and youth of color, how they are criminalized, and that most of them will have some involvement with the criminal justice system. So I don't think hosts have an expectation that that's not there. And for many of our GLBT youth of color, that's the biggest barrier that they have for housing, for renting, and for getting a job, is the fact that they have a history of incarceration. So we definitely talk a lot about that during the training. We have some hosts who have a history of incarceration, right? That's one of the ways, one of the things that I actually like about the fact that we're not licensing host homes. It means that the who gets to be a host is determined by us in the community as opposed to a licensing entity. And of course, I'm not talking about hosts who have histories of incarceration because of violence or you know, other issues that would keep them from being a host. But we have some who have been activists and have been arrested for, you know, different things, and so so that's how we, I guess, work with that. It's really case by case, and the hosts with the GLBT Host Own program don't have an expectation that they have. They don't have some sort of involvement. We do a warrant check before young people move into host homes, so that's the only thing that we do, because we want to know before they move in with hosts.
Right. How about for you, Betsy?
Yeah, I would agree with Rocky on that. We're very similar in the manner that we do screen the host homes and we do background checks, but it does not necessarily prohibit them from being a host home parent. Now, if there was like a sex offense or a child abuse neglect, that type of thing, those were things that we may not necessarily house them in there. But for the other, I mean, you know, same thing as Rocky said, there may be a small infraction on there that would not prevent them from being a host home parent. And then with the youth also, we do also check for warrants. And then if they're older than 18, because we have some older youth, we would just do a sex offense check on them if there's other children that might be in the home or that sort of thing. But yeah, we're very open to how that situation looks for each individual family and youth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And to go back to working with within the homelessness system, how involved are your programs with the existing and the larger homelessness system in your community? Are you a part of the coordinated assessment, coordinated entry process in your communities? And Betsy, I know that might be a little bit different how that works in rural communities.
For us, in the rural area, we're trying to establish kind of a coordinated assessment here locally within our Scottsbluff community, as well as one within our Panhandle. The state is also doing some coordinated assessment work. That's going to look a little different, obviously, because we're covering such a vast area of the state to try to get that to work well. But we do have some central service navigators here in the Panhandle, and that has been a very successful thing for us to be involved in. So the way that works is it's a central access point, but it can come from anywhere. It's no wrong door, and all referrals for older youth experiencing homelessness funnel through the central navigator. They collect the data, and they really help assess capacity, measure the outcomes and goals, and then from there they help connect those youth or those providers calling on behalf of youth to some of those other opportunities that are available to them. So we're very involved in our continuum of care and other programs, because for us some of that is really our lifeline to other resources and things in our small communities. So.
Mm-hmm. And Avenues as a whole is very involved. Our executive director, Deborah Loon, is very connected to all of the other homeless youth serving organizations, and part of the community conversations about coordinated assessments. And so the short answer is yes.
Okay, great. And final question. So we're leaving all these great people who are listening in on this webinar who may be interested in trying to start a host homes program in their own community.
Do it.
Yeah, I know, right? Everybody, do it now. Go. So realistically, do you guys have an estimation of? And Betsy, I know you guys you started more recently. What's the timeline like on that? Ramping up, getting started.
I would say you definitely need to try to build on what some other people have already done. I mean, there's some providers across the country. I'm sure Rocky, as well as we, would be willing to share information on that. Some of the first things I did was take other programs' host home manuals and read through them and say, what is the framework here that we can look and build upon? I would say within 6 months you could have a good established kind of plan, some framework in place, start reaching out and maybe even recruiting some host homes. But I really think depending on how your community accepts that or wants that is going to give you your real time frame. But I would say within 6 months you could have a good start, and sometimes you just need to get into it and see how it's going to work. We have tweaked the program so much based on what we've learned. You can't always predict what that's going to look like.
I would agree with Betsy. If the work has already been done in the community with conversations and looking at what are going to be the effective responses and that the community will support, if that's already there, then 6 months feels realistic. If communities are just now starting conversations about youth homelessness and doing the research, I would say about 2 years.
Okay, great. Okay, looks like we are just about out of time. Thank you again so much to Rocky and Betsy, and to everyone that's working in your awesome programs. I think it's two really important examples that people can learn a lot from. And I really could spend all day talking about host homes. I'm just really in love with the model, and I think it's something that we could all be doing a lot more of. And from what I understand from some of my friends in King County and Washington, the youth really want that program too. So we are out of time for this webinar. We will have more youth homelessness webinars in the coming months, so do be on the lookout for those in our upcoming newsletters, on social media. And I'd also like to ask those of you who are listening in, if you know about any programs in your community, or if you are yourself doing innovative host home models in your communities, please do get in touch with me, because I would like to learn more about them and what's working, what's not working for you, how we can be of help. And again, we will be posting this webinar in the next few days, as long as I can manage that technologically, along with the values document that Rocky mentioned, and that'll be on our website, inhomelessness.org. So thanks again, everyone, for listening in today and for all the vital work that you all are doing for the young people in your communities.